In this video, we'll be looking at signs of trig functions. In the drawing, you can see that I've shown the sides of our reference triangle if our vector lies in quadrant 1. This side along the positive x-axis will be positive, and the side that's parallel to the y-axis, since it's up above the x-axis, is positive, and the hypotenuse is always positive. So our sine of theta, remember sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so we have a positive over a positive, which is positive. Our cosine is defined as adjacent over hypotenuse, so positive divided by positive. So positive. And our tangent is defined as opposite over adjacent, so positive divided by positive, again, is positive. So I made the note here then that all of the trig functions are positive in quadrant 1. Now let's look at quadrant 2. My x value, which is along the x-axis here, is going to be negative because we're going left from the origin. My y value, or my side parallel to the y-axis, is going to be positive because he's above the x-axis, and my hypotenuse is always positive. Now sine is defined as opposite over hypotenuse, so we have a positive divided by a positive, which is positive. My cosine is defined as adjacent over hypotenuse, so I have a negative divided by a positive. And anytime you take a negative number and divide it by a positive number, you get a negative. And then my tangent is defined as opposite divided by adjacent, so positive divided by negative. And again, anytime you have a positive divided by a negative, you'll get a negative answer. So I've made the note then that the sine, if my reference angle is in quadrant 2, the sine will be the only positive trig function out of our 3 main trig functions. Let's move down to quadrant 3. Again, my x value, or this side along the x-axis, is going to be negative. My y value, or my side parallel to the y-axis, is negative because he's below the x-axis, and my hypotenuse is positive. So now if we look at our trig functions, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so negative divided by a positive, which is a negative. My cosine is defined as adjacent over hypotenuse, so negative divided by a positive, which is a negative. My tangent is defined as opposite over adjacent, so negative over a negative, and when we have a negative divided by a negative, we get positive. So I made the note here then that in quadrant 3, my tangent is the only trig function that's positive. And then finally, let's look at quadrant 4. My x value, or the side on the x-axis, is positive. The side that's parallel to the y-axis is negative, and my hypotenuse is positive. Sine is defined as opposite over hypotenuse, so negative divided by a positive, which is a negative. My cosine is defined as adjacent divided by a hypotenuse. So positive divided by positive, which is positive. And then my tangent is defined as opposite over adjacent. So negative divided by a positive, which is a negative. So my cosine in quadrant 4 is the only trig function that's positive. Now there's a little saying that we can use to remember these main positive values, and that's all students take calculus. And we're just looking at these first letters. Start with your quadrant 1 and move in a counterclockwise rotation, going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So all students take calculus. Would remind you of which trig functions are positive in those quadrants.